5 bodies have been recovered from rubble following the shelling of a town in eastern Ukraine on Tuesday. One family in particular was devastated when their house collapsed on them. A father and daughter were killed, the mother and son seriously injured.
Сыночка моя! Сыночка! Господи! Господи!
Очнулась от того, что кричит ребенок. Увидела, что нет руки у меня, наложила жгут и раскопала ребенка. А мужа с дочкой я не смогла раскопать, их достали ЖМЧСники. Муж без руки, весь изломан. Дочку разорвала напополам.
Well, after examining the scene, European monitors said the damage was caused by heavy artillery that was supposed to have been withdrawn from the area under the Minsk peace agreements. Ukrainian authorities quickly pinned the blame on anti-government forces, while locals and the self-proclaimed Donetsk Republic say the assault came from army positions. RT's Gane Chichikan brought those allegations up at a State Department briefing.
Is that all right under the Minsk agreement to use heavy artillery in residential areas like that?
Well, let's take a step back and look at the situation in eastern Ukraine, because there's a whole lot more to it than this report that you've mentioned, which I'm not able to confirm and I'm not familiar with.
Well, Gane continued questioning the State Department on what it knows about the violations of the ceasefire.
The State Department spokesperson was not familiar with the incident. He did not seem to be familiar with any reports about the Ukrainian army's shelling of residential areas in eastern Ukraine. It also seemed to me that the State Department spokesperson was going out of his way to avoid answering questions about the Ukrainian government's actions, choosing to solely focus on violations by the rebels. Take a listen.
How closely do you follow
yes.
with what's happening in eastern Ukraine? Do you read daily reports from, or only what the Ukrainian government is telling you?
The OSCE plays a monitoring role on the ground, and if you look at the OSCE's reports,
they do report about those shellings.
They also report the violence that I've described, which continues on the Ukrainian side of the ceasefire lines. And again, the primary source of violations of the Minsk agreements and the ceasefire come from the separatists on the Russian side. So
you're saying their potential violations
no.
justify the Ukrainian government's violations?
Look,
is that what you're saying?
I really don't have anything to add beyond my statement earlier, that the overwhelming number of violations are coming from the Russian and separatist side in eastern Ukraine. Yes.
We often hear U.S. officials say how important the Minsk agreements are, but they apparently also think that one side should abide by the agreements more than the other. The NATO chief also spoke in Washington this Wednesday, and he urged all parties to fully implement the Minsk agreements. But Mr. Stoltenberg went on to say that the conflict in Ukraine is about much more than just Ukraine.
We cannot look at Russia's aggressive actions in Ukraine in isolation. They are part of a disturbing pattern of Russian behavior that goes well beyond Ukraine.
At the same time, Vice President Joe Biden spoke along the same lines.
What's happening in Ukraine is about much, much, much more than that. It's about the future of NATO, our collective self-defense, and our unity, our strength, our ability to deter aggression together. Russia is taking actions to weaken and undermine its European neighbors and reassert its hegemonic ambitions.
So top Western officials see Ukraine as an international conflict where they all have a stake. And in light of this, perhaps it is not surprising that when Kiev violates its commitments under certain agreements, U.S. and European officials are prepared to stand by Kiev no matter what.
Fighting continues in Yemen, where bombing raids against Houthi rebels have claimed hundreds of lives. The bombardments have been carried out by a Saudi-led coalition for 2 months after rebel forces seized large areas of the country, including the capital Sana'a. Well, the UN World Health Organization reports widespread violations of international humanitarian law. Hospitals, ambulances and other health facilities are frequently attacked. Gareth Porter, a US investigative journalist, says the civilian cost is the last thing the coalition seems to care about.
I don't think that the Saudis themselves are going to take any notice of the human cost in Yemen of their war. The question is, what is the U.S. waiting for in order to force the Saudi hand with regard to ending the bombing and really beginning peace talks with the Houthis? I don't think any serious observer close to this issue believes that the Saudis can win militarily. They are really quite desperate to make an impact on the war, but they really don't have the means to do so.
22 US military personnel might have been exposed to anthrax at an American base in South Korea. The Pentagon stated earlier that it mistakenly sent live anthrax samples to laboratories in 9 American states and to its army base in Korea. The samples were meant to be inactive and sent for research purposes. A spokesperson for the Department of Defense said the public is not at risk. Tony Blair has announced in a letter to UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon that he'll step down as the world body's special Middle East envoy in June. He's been working on the peace agreement between Israel and the Palestinians since 2007, after he left his position as British Prime Minister. Blair plans to remain working in the region in an informal role. Around 20,000 people in the German city of Cologne have been evacuated from their homes as authorities defused a 1-ton World War II bomb. Dozens of ambulances arrived on the scene to move more than 1,000 residents from a retirement and disability centre. Schools and kindergartens within a 1-kilometre radius were closed. Authorities also banned shipping on the River Rhine and closed the city's airspace. At least 55 people have been killed in the Iraqi city of Fallujah in a series of suicide attacks by Islamic State. Meanwhile, Iraqi forces are conducting yet another operation against ISIL in the Anbar province. Soldiers killed several militants, gaining control of their equipment in the process. The main goal for Iraqi troops is to recapture the city of Ramadi as the provincial capital. The government campaign to wrest Anbar from the hands of ISIL has already raised questions about its effectiveness.
The Iraqi forces just showed no will to fight. They were not outnumbered. In fact, they vastly outnumbered the opposing force. And yet they failed to fight. They withdrew from the site.
Well, as the bickering continues, some heavily armed volunteers claim they're ready to tackle ISIL, this time, though, in the Philippines. Maria Finoshna investigates.
They train at least twice a week. How to shoot, how to work in a team. These American contractors are preparing to take up arms in a distant land against Islamic State.
They're hurting kids, they're hurting innocent people, and they're saying it's in the name of Islam. It doesn't work that way. There's always a bigger and badder person. And right now we're going to be that bigger and badder person to make sure that they don't come in.
Sleiman, a martial arts pro and firearms instructor, will go with his men to the Philippines, a country that you might not immediately associate with the world's fastest growing terrorist group. But local extremists recently pledged allegiance to ISIS, among many in South Asia.
If the U.S. doesn't have interest in a certain country, we're not going to hear it on the news. And just because we don't have interest in that country doesn't mean that they shouldn't be helped.
These men are not from the military. It's a private security mission with purely defensive goals, taking on a duty where they say their government has fallen short.
The United States just killed the head ISIS member who was in charge of all the oil. So if you look down, they work their way to the money. They're after the big people.
Does anyone care at all about civilians? Like ordinary people? Kids?
Not as you would in the States.
When we ask them who sponsors their mission, they only say they are paid overhead.
We all have full-time jobs. This is just something that we decided to get together and say, you know what? We need to do what we can with what we know and do it for the greater good.
Under the terms of their contract, they can bring a limited supply of weapons and will pick up the rest on arrival. But the weapons they do bring are not just any weapons.
This is a standard rifle, empty, standard length. We're all in a vehicle. There's 4 guys, same rifles. There's no room. So what's going to happen is that I come to George and I say, hey, look, we need shorter rifles.
They will tell me, does it need to be suppressed? Does it need to be quiet? Does it need to be a long-distance shot? Does it need to be something, again, for close quarter?
This would be the end result. So now we're in a vehicle. I can have this under a jacket, so I'm sitting here. Anybody in traffic can walk by, can't see a rifle. Something were to happen, we just come straight up and we'd be able to engage our targets.
Marie Noshner, RT, South Florida, USA.
Online for you right now, how many cups is too many? Well, the European Food Safety Authority publishes guidelines on how much caffeine is bad for your health. All the details are on our website. Also, whilst you're there, I'll take a look at tens of thousands of ladybirds which swarmed the US high school. The invasion was intended as a prank, but those behind it face serious charges. More details online, rt.com. Now, nature lovers in Taiwan have been treated to a rare sight. An endangered Siberian crane has landed on the island by mistake. Now, the bird that was migrating from eastern Russia to China apparently strayed from its flock and got lost along the way. Birdwatchers say it's about a year old and narrowly escaped becoming prey to larger birds and stray dogs. Well, local media say it was the first time in recent history that a Siberian crane has visited Taiwan. That's made the bird something of a celebrity, with twitchers from Australia and Japan, along with hundreds of locals trying to spot it. Now, the adventures of the crane have earned it a Facebook page as well, where children have been drawing pictures and posting them online. It's hoped that the crane will be able to rejoin its flock when they fly back to Russia's east. Now, coming up on RT International, Max and Stacey take aim at Wall Street in the Kaiser Report. Stay with us.